Hello, it's time for a Combat Patrol Alternative Paint Scheme special. So as promised, I'm here today to bring you my alternative paint scheme special for the Aeldari, and it's going to be Iyanden. So while yellow may be a daunting colour, I'm going to show you that it is quite easy to do, and we're just going to be using the paints we're going to be getting in the collection to do so. So slightly different to my other paint guides, I've actually broken down this into sections. So we're going to start by doing all the colours that share a yellow wash, then all the colours that do a black wash, and finally all the colours that do a brown wash, all the way through to their final stages. So we'll start with the yellows, golds, etc., work our way up to the blues and the black, and then do our final smaller details such as the reds. So to do this, I'm using a Storm Guardian as it's a nice open pose, but this can be applied to all your other models as well, whether they're Storm Guardians, Guardian Defenders, or any other Aeldari Iyanden Craft World models. As a special bonus, there will be a Patreon exclusive video where I paint up a Farseer in the Iyanden colour scheme. So if you want to see that, check out the link in the video description for my Patreon and sign up to any of the tiers. It will be available for all paid members. Benefits include getting a name in the credits, special shout outs, and of course you'll also be getting some exclusive benefits coming very soon, commission discounts, and I am working on a Discord server so we can have a bit of a discussion, share pictures, works in progress, etc. all in one place. I have also noticed that my extra emails aren't working, so they are going to be scrapped, although I have done questions.madmerlins as a proper email, so that is accessible. But yeah, the Discord server will hopefully solve a lot of problems and get communication between me and you guys running a lot better. Finally then, don't forget to do all the usual, like the video, subscribe to the channel, drop me a comment down below, and of course don't forget that the Combat Patrol Carnage is proudly sponsored by warbay.shop. There's links to them and other links in the video description, so do check them out and you might find your next hobby project at a bit of a discount. Drop me a comment down below if you want any alternative colour schemes for different factions coming up soon. I'll try my best to grab a couple of random models off eBay and I'll be able to paint them up in your suggested colour schemes. Right then, that said, let's head to the table and we'll paint our Storm Guardian in the colours of Iyanden. So the first thing we need to do for our model is to get down our base coats. You can do this in one of two ways. You can either do it as the magazine suggests, which is build up 3 layers of Avalanche Sunset, or you can do the way I've done it, which was using a spray primer. So luckily I actually have a half-used can of Avalanche Sunset spray. So I did all my Aeldari models in the Avalanche Sunset spray. If you don't have Avalanche Sunset, any light bony colour will work. I've also done a Spirit Seer working up from a Zanji Dust or Desert Sand base if you're using Colourforge. And you could always, if you want a brighter yellow, use Wraithbone as a nice base coat and work up yellows from there. But as we're using only the paints in our collection, we're going to be using what the magazine suggests. So all we'll do is give a all-over coat of Avalanche Sunset, just so we have that solid base coat colour in case we need to come back to touching up any mistakes later on. So onto our model, we'll put a nice thin layer of Avalanche Sunset all over, using a fairly large brush so we can get good coverage. I'm using a pretty battered large base brush, but any rough base coating brush will work just as fine. So with our Avalanche Sunset dry, we can move on to our next colour. So we're going to pick out all our gold details with Retributor armor. So on our example model, there's not a lot. It's the Spirit Stone housing and the grip on the chainsword. But you might have other details on models. If you've got the accessories around the belt, there's the clips to do, as well as any gems on weapons, etc. Going down a little bit of Retributor armor and onto our model. So we've got the gemstone on the chest here. I think that's Retributor armor. Then we've got the gemstone and the crossguard on the chainsword, and don't forget to get the pommel as well. With our Retributor armor dry, we're now ready to move on to the next stage. The next stage is an optional stage. You'll want to base coat any of the exposed bare flesh with Wraithbone. But if you don't have any of that, you can skip straight to our first shade, which is going to be Ripened Flesh Shade. And this is we're going to be able to coat the entire model with, as we're going to be getting the gold, the yellow, and if you've got any, the Wraithbone as well. So we'll get puddle on our palette, so we can draw up from. 3 dollops should be enough. Making sure you're not too overloaded. We can put this straight onto our model, working it into all the yellow. You can, of course, avoid the weapons if you want, as those are going to be black later on anyway. But your main goal is to get all the yellow armor and any gold detail as well. If you've got too much paint like we have on the back here, just clean off your brush and soak up the excess with a clean brush and move it about. Right, with our Ripened Flesh Shade dry, you can see it's picked out all that detail quite nicely. But it's also shaded it down pretty dark, and we're going to brighten that up. And to do that, we're going to be doing something called dry brushing. We haven't met that yet in the collection, but it's a very simple process that helps you to build up layers with very little effort. So we're going to go back to our base layer of Avalanche Sunset. Shake it up as usual and open your pot. To dry brush, we're going to be using a nice flat brush. In this case, I'm actually using an STC large dry brush. We're going to gather some of the paint on the end of our brush like that. We don't need a mega amount. And we're going to work it off into a bit of tissue paper here. Until we're not leaving behind a lot of paint like so. Then onto our model and work this all over the yellow armor, leaving that shade in the recess and brightening up the flatter panels. You might want to do a couple of layers of this depending on how bright you want your models to look. If you want an even brighter look, you might even want to go for a brighter yellow dry brush, such as Euro Yellow, which will be in the collection later on. For me, I'm happy to just stick with Avalanche Sunset. I'm going to do a couple of layers just so it's got a nice build-up of yellow again. Don't be worried about being too neat. It doesn't actually affect the gold too much as it's a similar colour. And getting it on areas we haven't painted yet is fine because we'll be painting over those in a moment anyway. And the good thing about dry brushing is it's dry. So it doesn't take long to dry. And there we go. We've got a nice built up transition going back to the Avalanche Sunset. If you've got some areas like here or here where you've slightly overbrushed, simply get a nice thin brush, go back to your Ripened Flesh Shade and simply recess shade around it. to bring out the detail again. But with that done, we're now ready to move on to our next colour. And we're going to continue focusing on the armour, and we're going to use Uriel Yellow. So we're going to use Uriel Yellow to bring out the final highlights on the armour, and we don't need to go overboard. This is a nice bright colour, and luckily with the Aeldari, there's very few sharp edges, so we only really need to pick out the most upper edges. So we'll get some of this on our palette prepared. You don't need to add too much water, as Uriel Yellow is a nice thin paint anyway. You will though want to make sure you wash off your brush. Make sure you have a nice point and load up fresh with some Uriel Yellow. So our predominant areas we're going to pick out are the sharper highlights here on the top of the armour, including the back veins. Going down the sides like here and here. I'm also going to pick out any areas such as the top of the chest here where the light would catch. So I'll do a thin edge highlight using the tip of our brush. And also pick out any raised nubs like just there. Work your way around the model until you're happy. I'm not going to be doing too much, just the most upward facing areas. There we go, with our Uriel Yellow dry. As you can see, I've picked out the most upper edges, including the knees, the feet, some of the back panels as well there, and even the fingers on the weapon arms. So our next stage is going to be an optional one again. If you've picked out any bare flesh, you want to highlight using pallid witch flesh, and really just want to touch the areas such as the brow, the cheekbones, the nose, and maybe the jawline. You don't want to go overboard with it, otherwise it'll overpower the base layer. But yeah, just focus on the most prominent areas and you'll get a nice pleasing result. For example, here's one I painted bare flesh. You can see where I've picked out the pallid witch flesh areas, really helping to define the face. So we can move on to our final highlight colour for yellow, and that's going to be Stormhost Silver, and this is just a tiny highlight on all of the gold details. So you're not going to need a massive amount again, as we're not going to be doing too much. So on the likes of weapons, we're going to pick out the sharpest edges on the pommel here, especially areas facing upwards. Picking out a little bit of detail on the raised surface of the spirit stones, ready for our highlight. And with that, all of our yellow wash-based colours are done. We're going to move over now to looking at all the colours that share a black wash. So moving over to all the colours that's going to share a black wash, we're going to first work on that iconic Iyanden dark blue. And the only colour in the collection we get that's blue is Macragge Blue. But once we hit it with the black wash, it'll actually darken it down quite enough to give it that dark blue look that that Iyanden is well known for. So we get a small amount of this prepared on our palette, as we're not doing a lot of areas. Brush a quick clean and then reload up. So, of course, the most obvious area to pick out is that Iyanden helmet. So being careful, especially around the yellow faceplate that we've already completed. Just pick out all that blue helmet. Other areas to pick out will be any of the little straps on the legs and arms, any bits of banding, such as this one here on the arm, and for some variety you can also pick out some of the spirit stones across the unit in this colour as well. While I've done mostly all my others pink, let's do this guy blue just for a bit of difference. There we go. As an extra bonus, I've picked out the shoulder pads on my Storm Guardians just to help them look a little more different to the rest of the Guardians. I know the weapons are a big standout difference, but this gives a little bit more of a visual interest. So with the blue done, I'm going to move over to our next colour. So we're going to use Abaddon Black, and this is going to be on all the weapons and the soft joints. So, as usual, we'll get some prepared on our palette. And you may have noticed I'm using the same brush for near enough every colour and stage. That's because this is a nice size 3 that keeps a lovely fine point, so I can do even fine work that normally a large brush like this wouldn't be able to do. So, onto our models, we're going to be picking out the gun with the Abaddon Black. Be careful around the fingers. And we're also going to pick out the full of the chainsword, being careful around that gold that we've done. Don't forget to get the power unit and the teeth. Finally, for soft seals, you've got the neck joint here. Pick that out with Abaddon Black. And we've also got the exoskeleton here on the back of the armor and the little gaps between the fins and the panels. It took 2 layers of black to get a solid coat over the yellow, but as you can see, it's looking really good. So moving on to our next colour, we've got 2 different pinks to do. So we're going to need Screamer Pink. This is going to be for any of the Spirit Stones on our model. And Baraknar Burgundy, this is going to be for the plume on the Storm Guardian's head. So this is a unique detail to the Storm Guardians, so you won't have to do it on every model. And we need a little bit of pink, as there's only the 2 Spirit Stones on the weapon to do. So I'll pick out those with the Screamer Pink. Leaving that gold around the outside. And then for our Baraknar Burgundy, we're going to pick out the plume on the top of his helm and the weapon grip as well. So there we go, our 2 pinks are done. So the next paint we're actually going to skip, as it is a colour that is specific to certain models. So the colour in question is going to be Lead Belcher, and this is only going to be for models that have blades, such as this Storm Guardian here, or even our Farseer. So as this model doesn't have any of those details, we can skip straight to our next colour. Well, not really a colour, it's a special type of paint. So we're going to add our basing detail now so that we can hit it with the black wash at the same time as all our other models. So the collection gives us Astrogranite, so we're going to put a nice thin layer of this over our base. So yeah, a small amount on the shovel. And we really want to make this go as far as we can. So straight to our thin end, we're going to spread this about, getting nice thinned layer all over our base. And I found the thinner the better, the more the fine grit will actually show through with this paint. So this is why we're putting it on as thin as we can. So there we go, nice thin layer down all over our base. Just got to leave that a good half hour or so to dry before we can start applying our wash. There we go, we can see our texture paint has dried, and you can see the grit stands out quite nicely there. And once we shade it down and dry brush it, we'll have a nice finished result. So speaking of shading, let's head over to non-oil, which is going to be the shade for all of these colours. So we're going to want to have a bit of control here as we're going to be working around other completed colours. So that's why I'm using my size 3 here, and making sure I'm not overloaded. So first off, we're going to do on the helmet and the plume. So shade those areas nicely with the non-oil. Be careful when we come to the yellow faceplate there. If you've done the blue shoulder pads, don't forget to get them. All your gemstones, whether they're pink, blue, or any other colour. And to help it put a bit of definition on the weapons, we'll shade those as well. So now all our base coats and our shade is done, we're ready to start highlighting. As you can see, that blue looks awesome, nice and dark like Iyanden should be. So to highlight, we're going to go for Calgar Blue, which is the only highlight blue we get in the collection. But it's still a nice perfect blue for highlighting our armour. So there's not a lot of details that actually need highlighting, so we'll need a small amount of this colour. So get some on our palette, nice and thinned. Brush it clean. And load up again, making sure we've got a nice thin tip. So our first detail to highlight is going to be the helmet. So getting the edge around the eyes and the faceplate. And we'll get the edges on the shoulder pads if you've done those. And we just want to get the top edges on all the straps. And don't forget the banding as well. So with our blue highlighted, we're going to start looking at highlighting the weapons. So we're going to be doing a 2-stage highlight. And we'll need 2 different greys for this. First we want Mechanica Standard Grey, and then we'll want a little bit of Administratum Grey. So first, Mechanica Standard Grey, and this is going to be a dry brush. So we'll get some on the palette, work off as much of the paint as we can. That's about right. And onto our weapons, we're going to pick out all the raised details with a dry brush of Mechanica Standard Grey. And we'll even reach in a light dry brush on that exosuit detail there. And next we're going to want Administratum Grey, and this we're going to need to do in 2 different ways. First we're going to use it as a sharp edge highlight on the weapons, and then we're going to dry brush the base detail. So getting a small amount of this ready on our palette just to do some of the sharpest details on the weapons. So we'll catch the upward facing edges of the chainsword here. And any raised detail as well. And then we'll pick out the sharper edges of the shuriken catapult. And flip around to the back, we'll get the upper edges of each of the segments. On the back like so. And then for our base, we'll do a light dry brush of Administratum Grey all over that astrogranite texture. And there, our base is finished. Now there's only one colour left to do on our colours that share a black wash. And that's going to be Pink Horror, and this is just for the gems and the plumes. So for any pink gems, we want to try and get a nice thin tip to our brush. And we want to get the side that's up against the light. And for our plumes, we want to pick out the raised details with an edge highlight. And not forgetting to pick out the detail on the weapon grip as well. One final detail for the gems that we need an extra colour of, and that's a little dot of white scar to add a reflection point. So hold your breath. And you want to dot it in the opposite corner to where we've painted the brighter pink or blue. Just like so. And with that, all the colours that share a black wash are finished. Now we just have a couple more colours to do, and these all share a brown wash. There was one colour I forgot to mention. If you have any silver, edge highlight with Stormhost Silver, as you can see on the example here with the blade. But moving on to our last colours. So, our first colour is going to be Mephiston Red, and this is for any eye lenses on our Guardians. You can also do Spirit Stones in red if you wanted to. Just remember to do them with the brown wash, not the black wash. So, using the very tip of our brush, we're going to get the red into the eye lenses, like so. There we go. Now the next colour is an optional colour. I've done all the hair on my bare-faced model's Rakkar Flesh, and we can see that here on our finished example. So once that is done and dried, we can move on to our brown wash, which is our Grex Earthshade. And as we only need a very little bit of this to go into the eyes, you can take straight from the pot and shade those recesses. So with our brown wash dry, we can highlight our eyes, and for that we're going to use Wild Rider Red. And again, a nice thin tip to our brush is needed. Not a lot of paint, as we only need to paint a small thin line. So again, going into the corner as best we can and painting a thin line on that raised area, leaving the darker colour in the recesses. There we go. The final colour to do then is highlight your hair using Pallid Witch Flesh, which again you can see on my finished example here. And we return to Abaddon Black for our last detail to do, which is going to be the base rim of our model. So I'll thin out some Abaddon Black, and you'll probably need to do 2 coats over the yellow, but just get a nice even layer all around the base. And there we go. That is the Iyanden colour scheme for the Craft World Aeldari complete. And there he is, mixed in with the rest of the squad, and they are all looking fantastic. I've even got the Wave Serpent shield there, which is covered with a nice transfer of the Craft World rune of Iyanden. And yeah, my Storm Guardians are looking good. So yeah, you can apply this to all the models in your Aeldari collection. And as I said, there will be a Patreon exclusive, which will be later on in the week, which will be focusing on the Farseer here. As you can see, I've put them on a bit of a bigger base, just because it makes them look a bit more impressive. But I'll probably end up picking up another copy of this guy just so I have him on a official sized base for tournaments if I ever do take my Aeldari to tournaments. But that's it. That's how I paint Aeldari in the colours of Iyanden. I hope you found this more in-depth video very helpful. If you'd like to see more videos, don't forget to, of course, like this video. Comment down below if you want to see any other alternative colour schemes. And don't forget you can support me on Patreon or other links notified in the video description. So all that's left for me to do then is to say thank you all very much for watching. And I'll see you next time on more Combat Patrol Carnage. Goodbye.